Hello, everyone, and welcome to our week 4. Let me click on modules here, virtual classroom. So as you can see, in week 1, we learned about social research, the scientific method, and basic concepts towards research. In week 2, we discussed ethics and social science research. Last week, we talked about variables, their measurement, and designing social experiments. And this week, we're talking about ethnography and observations. And so we have our discussion where we're evaluating qualitative issues. So let's go into that a second so we can kind of review that. So you're going to make 3 posts in this discussion. Your initial post, which should be at least 150 words, and hopefully you'll do that by tomorrow, Wednesday. And then your responses, you want to respond to at least 2 others, and that's due on Sunday. Key here is quality over quantity, right? The expectation is that you provide insightful comments and a well-crafted response with some substantive nature that kind of shows that you can spell properly, use grammar, and obviously use some citations in the process there. So if you, what you're going to do is this is a 2-step discussion post, right? So the first step is you're going to provide an initial response to the following prompt. And always try to, if you have any personal experience with it, I would welcome that. Not only does it help you meet your word count, but it also gets us all to know each other better. So are ethical issues different when you are conducting qualitative observations online compared to other types of qualitative observations? So keep in mind that qualitative observations, you're now looking for attributes. You're not looking for numbers in this case. You're looking for signatures or some type of attribute, and you might be getting some information via a survey instrument. And keep in mind that with survey instruments, we want to make sure that there is validity and content validity. So we want to make sure that we're structuring the questions in a way that is helpful, and also that we can prove to, like, wherever we want to publish this, that the content that we're asking is valid. And then other types of qualitative observations would be when you're actually conducting an interview and you're probably looking at a person's, behavior or tone or mannerisms. That could all be part of qualitative observations. And your second step is to read other students, your classmates' initial posts, and just make 2 responses to them. And you want to respond where you're either adding some clarification, possibly asking questions, or possibly asking constructive criticism or a constructive different point of view to the discussions. So, and if you do disagree with their opinion, that is lovely, but we want to keep our debates professional and maybe not personal. So we would want to provide examples or evidence such as sources to support your position. And that is our discussion for this week. And I know some of you have already participated, and I've had some responses. So I think that is wonderful. And let me close this so we can get back to that. And then let's just talk about our assignment for a little bit before we move into our PowerPoint. So here we're talking about non-participation or non-participant observation, and we're evaluating research. So we have a study by 2 sociologists at Florida International University, and that is my alma mater. So I went to FIU, Florida International University, for my bachelor's in accounting and management, and for my master's in accounting information systems. So what these 2 sociologists did is they observed through qualitative analysis to examine a topic that had not been the focus of very much research, and that is the impact of disasters on women's lives. And so here, the step 1 is to read this excerpt below and answer the question. So Hurricane Andrew actually happened, I think in 1992 or 93. I remember this hurricane because I was in South Florida. It was my senior year of high school, and everything was demolished. It was probably my first major hurricane storm. And I had been in hurricanes before, having lived in Florida. Originally, I lived in New York, and then we moved to Florida when I was about 12 or 13. And so I was about 17. So this was maybe, 5 years later. So here we have Hurricane Andrew through a woman's eyes. So the unique experiences of female disaster victims or survivors and rebuilders tend to be overlooked in disaster studies. Excuse me. So our work analyzes a major natural disaster through the eyes of women, with notable expectations. Gender rarely appears even as a variable of analysis in disaster studies, as a gendered perspective is almost totally absent from the literature. And what they mean by the literature is typically when you are conducting these types of experiments or study, you review previously published articles or previously published studies to see what has taken place and what hasn't happened. And that additional contribution that you can provide is based on your study is what you're adding or adding to the literature, that contribution. So the two sociologists from Florida International University, to help address these concerns, we conducted a qualitative sociological analysis of women's experiences in the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew in the southern part of Florida. We focused on the implications of gender and the roles of women in preparation, relief, and recovery efforts at both the household level and the community level. So data was collected through observations in the tent cities used for temporary housing, service centers, provider organizations, and at meeting of emerging community groups. We also interviewed immigrant and migrant women from Haiti, Cuba, Mexico, Central America, African American single mothers, grandmothers, women construction workers, business owners, farm workers, teachers, social workers, battered and homeless women. So you can see they have a wide array and a diverse population of women that these two sociologists are looking at. So the family caregiver roles of women expanded dramatically at all stages of a disaster response. Most of the women that they interviewed prepared their family for the approaching hurricane, including stocking supplies and getting the household ready. Women who reached beyond the boundaries of their own homes were crucial to response efforts. So they often helped elderly neighbors and friends, either directly or by connecting these needy people with the community services. So households headed by poor minority women have tended to be the last to recover. According to personnel from the public and private agencies working to help victims find housing, the families who are left in the trailers tend to be the poorest of the poor, most of whom are these minority women. So paradoxically, Hurricane Andrew also brought new opportunities to some women. We learned, for example, of women earning equitable construction wages, developing new employment skills, and using relief monies to leave violent relationships. Women have forged new friendships and found common ground as they struggled to rebuild their homes, neighborhoods, and community. So what you're going to do here is, what was the purpose of the study as suggested by your reading of this? And if you want to read more, you can look for Morrow and Arison, 1996. And let's just click that and let's go into Google Scholar here. And that, so I think it stopped recording, but I want to make sure that you knew. So all I did was go into Google Scholar and type in, as I did here, Morrow and Anderson, and you just go into Google Scholar. Let me see, because I think it did. Here you see Google Scholar. So yeah, it's still recording. Sometimes this is a little quirky. So if you click here and then you just see, you type that in, it takes you directly to this article, which I have open right here. And this is quite typical of a manuscript in publication. So I'm going to go back a little bit. Oops. Let me see here. Sorry about that. So here is Hurricane Andrew through women's eyes, the summary and recommendations. And then you see here that it was published in the International Journal of Mass Emergencies and Disasters. And here you see Betty Hearn Morrow and Elaine Ernison, and they were also part of, the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Florida International University. And typically you see this is the abstract right here of the article. Then it goes into somewhat of an introductory part. And then right here you see contributions of a gendered analysis. And here they talk about the gender neutral social society in spite of all of these other documents that are saying that, the significance of gender and gender relations in social life. And they give you some references here, and they tell you, to understand the responses to disasters, we need to understand like the domestic labor and decision making. And then it goes into the neglect of gender in disaster research. And right here, what they're trying to do is show you their contribution of this article to the literature. So they are actually taking the effects of gender roles and relationships that have been ignored previously, and they're looking at that. And they're also looking at the dimensions of race and ethnicity and culture and social class. And so they give you some seminal works here, and then they tell you what they did. So so this is their research design and methodology, and hopefully you'll see some similarities in this to some of our chapters. And so here you see that to address these concerns, what they did is a qualitative sociological analysis of women's experiences in the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew, which happened in the southern part of Florida. So they focused on implications of gender and the roles of women in preparation, relief, and recovery, both from the household and community level. And they collected their data through interviews and focus groups with victims and service providers. They also had here observations in the tent cities that were used for temporary housing, also observations in service centers, in provider organizations, and in meeting of emergent community groups. So basically, they also drew from other projects of the Florida International University Disaster Research Team, which included 50 interviews in the tent cities and more than 40 interviews with agency caseworkers. And then secondary data sources were agency reports and documents, some research reports and articles that were in the local papers. And then they give you like some limitations of the study here, telling you that their goal was not to represent women as a group or to speak for most women, but just to study this particular segment of the victim population. And so that's also important when you're talking about any type of experiment. And so here they provide a brief overview of the emergent issues along with examples of the data in which they're based. And they also give you another limitation. While men were affected by many of the same issues, the researchers here argue that the impact on women tended to be different and was less likely to be addressed. So their purpose for the study was not only to better understand the circumstances around the daily lives of women victims and providers, but to give them a voice so that we can keep rebuilding efforts and hopefully help in future disaster responses. So here they tell you some of the emerging issues. So the family caregiver roles of women expanded dramatically at all stages of the disaster response. And they give you here it resulted in the loss of 47,000 housing units and the dislocation of over 100,000 people. And then they give you some information from this. When you see these quotes right here, that usually tells you that they're directly quoting from one of the subjects in their interview. And then here you see in one case, a 77-year-old woman with a heart condition and diabetes was forced to spend the night in a nearby service station after her family had put her out. And then you see here another one migrant worker linked many related factors in a compelling, bleak portrait of a male response. And then you see that, and then another issue is that women emerged as the primary seekers of family assistance in the weeks and months after the storm. And so they took in family and friends, they provided relief stations, application centers, clinic agencies, and all of that. And then we see here the relief and recovery policies and practices often reflected a lack of understanding or respect for the realities of minority and or poor women's lives. So here we have the head of household policy, which some assistance program was based on a family model, didn't really suit these people because they were poor or ethnic populations. And then the lack of buildings and infrastructure throughout all of the South Metro-Dade County made it difficult, right, for the agencies to maintain operations. And I mean, typically when the hurricane happened, you would have the like Red Cross come out, and then hopefully they'd have some hot meals. And I mean, I remember getting those because I was a victim of Hurricane Andrew. And I mean, that was so welcome because water was scarce. I mean, everything was demolished. And if you see some pictures, let me see if I can go here. So Hurricane Andrew. Oh, let's see. Oh, here we go again. All right. Okay, we're back. I don't know why when I try to do something, it doesn't like it. And it goes through this. I don't understand. But Hurricane Andrew is what I'm trying to type here. Oh, okay. And I don't know why it's doing that. All right, let's not zoom in. All right, let's see if we go to somewhere else. Nope, it's not letting. Oh, maybe this. Huh. All right, I'm trying to get out of this. Unsuccessfully, obviously, but all right, we shall see. Let me see if I can click on here. All right, let's go back maybe. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I want to get rid of this. Oh, not that. Okay, apologies for that interruption because I was trying to find here Hurricane Andrew images, and just to show you the type of devastation that happened. And so this is exactly as I remember it. And so you see here, hopefully this will open in a second. And this is exactly, like all of the houses were leveled. I lived in something, similar to this neighborhood. And you can see it was a Category 5 and it was just absolutely devastating. And if we go back, I mean, this is how most towns were. It was like, these were the houses that were there. And then this was the mess that was there. And this is what you saw, like the houses, like in the house that I was in, there were no windows. All the windows were blown out. The front door was blown out. I mean, everything was in the house because, well, the back door was blown out because they were like glass sliding doors. And then the front door actually stayed. So there was all this like rubbish and debris in there. And then you just see like, this is the devastation that you saw. And so everything was just lost. And I mean, these were probably, at least we did lose like the roof in the house. But this is like these houses did a little bit better because they had some roofs. Like we lost part of the roof, and you see here, like this is like you see this house, and this is exactly how it was like where I was living at the time. Like we just had the roof but no windows, and thankfully we were able to get, because we had insurance, like a trailer in the back, and we were able to live. So this is kind of like the devastation that you're seeing. And then, but back to our article here, you see that women emerged as the primary seekers of family assistance in the weeks and months after the storm. Then you also see that the relief and recovery policies and the practices often reflected a lack of understanding or respect for the realities of the minority and or poor women's lives. And this was in the excerpt that you see in our assignment, like the head of household policy is based on the family model, which doesn't really work for poor and or some type of ethnic populations. There was the lack of building and infrastructure. And even when the agencies tried to reach these culturally diverse victims, they failed because of the best services to the victims were a little bit different than from what they understand it. So there might be some gender bias there. And then they hear you, but they don't hear you is what one woman concluded. Then you also see that women who reached beyond the boundaries of their own homes were crucial to the response efforts, right? So when, like we see in the excerpts that I just read you, they often helped elderly neighbors and friends. either directly or connecting them for community service. Family daycare providers were an interesting case study, right? Because just a day after their storm, parents arrived at their doorsteps of, like the partially destroyed home, like, here, you need to take care of my kids. I don't want to. I heard that often. I remember that. And it was not uncommon for these groups of women to band together and to kind of share the domestic tasks. Like, so these Mexican women were cooking over some open fires for hundreds that were camped in the remote area. And after the cook-off, they were given a choice of some rations of the food. And so it was just a very hard time. And just imagine thinking of all the creature comforts that we have: electricity, running water, just your home, all of that. So Dade County Schools, which opened 2 weeks after the hurricane, they didn't have power or running water, and most of the students that went back to school were living in partially destroyed or temporary shelters, as was my case. And so here you see what a daughter described. The father was ill, he lost his business, the mom was still trying to teach and rebuild their house. So that was the situation. Then you see women victims were especially vulnerable to exploitation and fraud during the recovery period. And so there were a lot of fraud going on. FEMA was the organization that kind of provided these housings, and you didn't know who to believe or what to believe. And women were always vulnerable to fraud, and so that's always a challenge. And also, women tend to not negotiate as well. So then the personal safety and security of women and their children were also an important concern, right? Because they felt unsafe in their homes because the neighborhoods didn't have lighting, there was trash, there was debris, there were a lot of different transient populations, people coming in and out, crime, armed and fearful neighbors. That was definitely predominant. And in that South Florida area, like the Miami area and South, that was also heavily crimed. And so then of the thousands who lost their jobs under the hurricane, women were not as likely to find substitute work related to cleanup or reconstruction activities, right? Because typically women at that time held some low wage jobs, and with the working conditions that allowed little job security. So that made them vulnerable to this disaster. Also, the formal response efforts failed to effectively utilize the experience and our expertise and leadership of women and their networks. So even that women that were in traditional relationships, they tend to define their domestic roles as extending beyond the household, but they were usually very active in disaster groups. And so there you find We Will Rebuild, and so Women Will Rebuild. So we see some emergence of women here. And then households headed by poor minority women tended to be the last to recover, as we saw in the excerpts in our assignment as well. So what the article continues to do is some policy recommendations. So engage women fully in disaster planning and response programs. Right, seek ways to more effectively inform women concerning disaster preparation and available relief and recovery services, right? So if you have these aggressive campaigns that you're targeting the female audience and you're providing these educational materials and educational information before and after the disasters, hopefully you don't have this type of fraud, and hopefully you can, get back together with that. And here they said that South Dade communities, right after Hurricane Andrew, followed broadcasts that were both in Creole and in Spanish. And so that was that was an improvement that happened after the hurricane. Then we see anticipate ways in which women will be particularly vulnerable and plan responses and recovery programs to address these special needs. So as a disaster planner, you want to make these special provisions. So if you're ill or disabled, or you're an older person, or you're in a group home, that you're going to address these special needs as well. And especially during a hurricane where you can lose power, you don't have access to your medication. And then take action to eliminate gender bias from the agencies and their practices. And then anticipate the need to supplement or replace services normally provided by community nonprofit agencies and volunteers, right? So if you have a heavily impacted community and you're going to lose financial support, or you're going to lose your normal volunteer base, then see what you can do to make that different. And we see here a strong voluntary organizations active in disaster group that can kind of provide these services in the absence of them. Then a sixth Policy recommendation is to identify and fully utilize the resources of the women leaders, and whether they're informal and formal networks throughout the recovery. So you have private and public roles that women were playing that were instrumental in meeting the household and community recovery needs. So you want, as a policymaker, to tap into this and make sure that it's the social fabric of the community, and make sure that it isn't underutilized or discounted, but instead use that as the women leaders to provide this dimension that was probably ignored most of the time, but that can help the recovery of most people in general. And then they give you a summary and a note. So the American Red Cross, FEMA, the YMCA, VISTA, these were all of the organizations that helped during Hurricane Andrew. And I know the American Red Cross and FEMA, I remember wholeheartedly. And then you see all of their references. So if we go back to our assignment, then you can see what was the purpose of the study as suggested by this excerpt. Or if you go back and you just Google, like you see here, I went to Google Scholar, and then I just typed in the citation that we have right here in our assignment, and then you'll go directly to the particular PDF here that's available, and then that's what you get. So you can read it in more of an entirety, and you can actually cite this as when you're doing your assignment as well, and that would be helpful. Then you have what subgroups of women did the researchers observe, and according to the researchers, which subgroup struggled the longest to recover from the hurricane. And you will see that those are the minority groups, as was mentioned in the excerpt and in the article. And then data from documents and newspaper articles were also incorporated in the report. You can look at those. And so I say here, you would probably want to look at those. And what might these sources of information reveal that observations alone would not? And briefly discuss the value of combining these qualitative information, like observations of caregiving behaviors, and then quantitative data like wages from employer payrolls, things of that nature. And then as a researcher on this study, how might you decide whether or not to disclose your identity? Keep in mind here that we want to go back to the Belmont report in Chapter 2, which includes the importance of obtaining your informed consent from human subjects. Make sure you put this paper in APA format. But I would say for our assignment for this virtual classroom, you want to absolutely go to Google Scholar, get the article as you see here, which I've opened in this link, and then you want to provide from the article a summary, right? So we have the excerpts, and then provide, maybe you can either highlight the areas of the articles that will help you completing the assignment that we have, which is our week 4 assignment. Or a second option would be you provide just a summary of the article in addition to the excerpt. So you're not going to put the same thing that we have here, but you're going to provide a summary. So here we only have a few items that were addressed, whereas for this week 4 virtual classroom, what you want to do is provide a summary, right? So make note of the contribution to the gendered analysis, and then make note of why this is a neglected gender in disaster research for reading this. And then what the actual researchers did, the research design and methodology. So you want to make sure that you address that. But the key here is the issues. So you would actually have within your summary document, or highlight here, the family caregiving roles of women. And then here you're going to go into the women emerged as the primary seekers. So all of these bolded areas, that is basically what the researchers came up with. So that is your assignment for your week 4 virtual classroom. You can present it one of 2 ways, right? So you can download this article and highlight either the areas here, all these questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, all these 4 questions, highlight them in your PDF, and then say question 1, question 2, question 3. So that will help you towards completion of the assignment. Or you can provide subsequently a highlight. So you would read the article and highlight it, the main points, right? And then, or highlight just the main or you can provide a summary. So you could provide a summary. You can take the pieces from the article and then just provide a 1 or 2 page summary to help you. But that is the assignment that you will submit in your week 4. If we go back to modules here and we go right here, so I'm going to record this video right here where it says week 4 virtual classroom task, and you're going to do one of 3 things. You are either going to go to all of the time you're going to locate the main article that we have, right? And then all 4 of these questions, you will go to the article and highlight some excerpts that you're going to use from the article to answer the 4 questions in your assignment. And there you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If you choose not to do that, then you can just highlight the article like you're reading all 19 pages and you're highlighting it as you read it. Or third, you would provide a 1 to 2 page typed or greater typed summary of the article. So that is what you are going to do and submit, into this piece, into our modules here and into our week 4 virtual classroom task. So that is your assignment. So instead of doing a quiz in Studio, since we're just going to expand our application assignment to include where you're going to highlight the article, the 4 questions, and where you find the answers to those within the main article, or you are going to just read the entire Morrison and Arison article and highlight the areas that are of importance, or thirdly, you will provide a Word document, 1 to 2 or 3 pages summarizing the article. Alexa, stop. Okay, so I hope that helps, and then make sure that you put that right here in our virtual classroom task, and I will look forward to your responses. Thank you.